I never thought I would hear my own death sentence whispered by someone I once called family. The morning air was biting cold, slicing through my coat as I stood on platform 7, waiting for the 9:45 train to arrive. My daughter-in-law Rebecca had insisted on accompanying me that day. At the time, I thought it was kindness. How naive I was. I remember the weight of her hand on my shoulder blade, too firm to be affectionate, too calculated to be casual. I remember the restless darting of her eyes, scanning the platform like a predator measuring the distance to its prey. I remember that smile, stretched too tight across her face, more grimace than warmth. And then I heard it, those 7 words that would change everything. Everyone will believe it was an accident. The whisper came so softly, so close to my ear, that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined it. But the pressure of her hand increased against my back, and I knew with terrible certainty that I had not. My heart seized in my chest. The platform seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The distant rumble of the approaching train suddenly sounded like thunder, like the drums of an execution march. How do you process the moment you realize someone wants you dead? That they have planned it? That they are seconds away from executing their plan? Time fractured into crystalline shards. I saw everything with brutal clarity. The yellow warning line at the platform's edge, just inches from my feet. The empty stretch of concrete where no witnesses stood. The security camera overhead, conveniently positioned at an angle that would show my fall, but not the hand that pushed me. She had planned this meticulously. But what Rebecca did not know, what she could never have known, was that I had discovered her scheme 3 days earlier. The overheard phone conversation. The financial documents hidden in her study. The text messages she thought she had deleted from my late husband's old phone. I knew about the inheritance she believed she deserved. I knew about her debts, her desperation, her greed that had metastasized into something monstrous. I knew she saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between her and millions of dollars in property, investments, and assets that my husband had left in my name. What she did not know was that I had prepared my own trap. The train's headlight appeared in the tunnel, a growing circle of light rushing toward us like a harboring angel or a messenger of death, depending on whose plan succeeded. Rebecca's fingers tightened on my back. She was going to push, but I was ready. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments which country you are watching from right now. Your support keeps this community alive, and I want to know how far this story reaches across the world. Everything that happened in the next 10 seconds would determine whether I lived to see justice served or became another tragic headline about an elderly woman's accidental death. Rebecca leaned closer, preparing her final move, and I made mine. It had not always been this way. There was a time when I believed Rebecca genuinely cared for her family. 7 years ago, when my son Daniel brought her home for the first time, I saw a young woman with ambition in her eyes and warmth in her smile. She charmed us all with her stories of growing up with nothing, of fighting her way through business school, of dreaming about a family she could finally call her own. My husband, Robert, had been particularly taken with her. "She is a fighter," he would say. "She reminds me of you when we first met." I smiled at the comparison, not seeing then what I see now, that he had confused ambition with character, hunger with heart. The wedding was beautiful. Rebecca wore vintage lace and cried real tears when Daniel placed the ring on her finger. I cried too, welcoming her into our family with open arms and an open heart. How could I have known I was embracing a viper? The first year passed without incident. Rebecca played her role perfectly. The dutiful daughter-in-law, always present at family dinners, always asking about my health, always complimenting my cooking. She laughed at Robert's jokes. She brought flowers on Sundays. She called me Mom without hesitation. I should have seen the calculation behind every gesture. The cracks began to show after Robert's first heart attack. He survived, but the doctor's warning was clear. Stress would kill him. Rebecca's concern seemed genuine, but I noticed how her questions always circled back to one topic, the will. "Mom, have you and Dad updated your estate planning?" she would ask, her voice dripping with false concern. "You know, just in case something happens. Daniel and I want to make sure everything is in order for you." Robert updated his will 6 months later. I helped him. We discussed every detail, every allocation, every contingency. He left everything to me, with clear instructions that upon my death, Daniel would inherit. It was standard, sensible, exactly what any married couple would do. Rebecca's smile never wavered when we told her, but something flickered in her eyes, something cold and calculating that disappeared so quickly I convinced myself I had imagined it. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were wearing a mask the entire time? Tell me in the comments. I know I'm not alone in this. Robert died 14 months ago. A massive heart attack in his sleep. Sudden, merciful, devastating. I held his hand as his body grew cold, and I wept until I had no tears left. Daniel grieved alongside me. Rebecca grieved too, or so I thought. Now I know she was calculating. The reading of the will confirmed what she already knew. Everything came to me. The house in Ashwood Gardens worth $3 million. The investment portfolio Robert had carefully built over 40 years. The commercial properties generating rental income. The savings, the stocks, the bonds. All of it mine to manage until my death. Rebecca's face remained composed, but I saw her jaw tighten. I saw her fingers curl into fists beneath the conference table. I saw Daniel reach for her hand, and I saw her pull away, just slightly, just enough. That night I heard them arguing through the walls. Their voices were muffled, but the anger was unmistakable. I pressed my ear to the shared wall of our adjoining townhouses. Yes, in my grief, I had asked them to move into the property next door so I would not be alone, and I caught fragments of their fight. Promised me we would be set. She could live another 20 years. I did not marry into this family to wait. The words cut deeper than any knife. My son's voice, attempting to calm her, to remind her that I was his mother, that I was grieving. Her response, sharp and venomous. Your mother is standing between us and the life we deserve. I pulled away from the wall and sat in the darkness of my bedroom, Robert's side of the bed still smelling faintly of his cologne. For the first time since his death, I felt truly alone. But I was not defeated. Not yet. Because even in my grief, even in my shock at overhearing those poisonous words, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Be careful. Be vigilant. Protect yourself." I had no idea how prophetic that whisper would become. Over the following months, Rebecca's mask slipped more frequently. The kindness evaporated, replaced by passive-aggressive comments about my age, my health, my outdated way of managing Robert's estate. She questioned every decision I made, every investment I maintained, every dollar I spent. "Do you really need such a large house at your age, Mom?" she would ask, her tone suggesting concern, while her eyes measured the property's value. "Would not it be easier to liquidate some of these holdings? You know, simplify things before anything happens to you?" Before anything happens to you. Those words should have been my final warning. Rebecca's transformation from subtle manipulation to overt hostility took 6 months. 6 months of increasingly aggressive suggestions that I sell the house, transfer assets, make things easier for everyone involved. Daniel, caught between his wife and his mother, became a ghost in his own life. I watched my son withdraw, his shoulders slumping under the weight of Rebecca's ambitions and my growing unease. He stopped visiting as often. When he did come, he barely met my eyes. "She is just worried about our future, Mom," he told me one afternoon, his voice hollow. "The economy is uncertain. Her business is struggling, She is stressed." I wanted to shake him. I wanted to scream that his wife was not stressed about the economy. She was stressed about waiting for me to die. But I held my tongue. What proof did I have beyond overheard arguments and intuition? So I began to watch and listen and document. I installed a simple voice-activated recording device in my living room, the kind advertised for recording lectures or business meetings. Nothing illegal, just insurance. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I would never need the recordings, that they would prove my suspicions wrong. I was wrong about being wrong. The recordings revealed everything. Rebecca and Daniel, sitting in my living room after I had supposedly gone to bed, discussing their financial situation. Her debts from a failed business venture. $200,000 in personal loans she had hidden from everyone. Her creditors growing impatient. Her desperation mounting. "If something happened to your mother," Rebecca said on one recording, her voice chillingly casual, "how quickly could we access the estate?" "Rebecca, stop!" Daniel's voice weak and pleading. "That is my mother you are talking about." "I am talking about our survival," she snapped. "I am talking about losing everything we have worked for because your mother is hoarding a fortune she does not even need. She is 68 years old and healthy. She could live another 20 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Rebecca spoke again, her voice so cold it made my blood freeze even listening to the playback days later. "Unless she does not." I sat in my bedroom, headphones in my ears, listening to my daughter-in-law contemplate my death as casually as one might discuss the weather. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the recorder, but still I had no concrete proof of intent. No evidence that would hold up in court. Just the chilling implications of a desperate woman's words. So I kept watching, kept recording, kept waiting for her to reveal her true plan. It came 3 weeks later. I had pretended to take my sleeping medication one evening, but had only placed the pill under my tongue, spitting it out once I reached my bathroom. I lay in bed, breathing slowly and evenly, waiting. Around midnight, my bedroom door creaked open. Through slitted eyes, I watched Rebecca's silhouette move across my room. She stood over my bed for a long moment, and I had to fight every instinct not to open my eyes fully, not to scream, not to reveal that I was awake and aware. She moved to my dresser, opened the top drawer where I kept my medications. I heard the rattle of pill bottles, the soft click of caps being opened and closed. She was tampering with my medication. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain she would hear it, but she finished whatever she was doing and slipped out of the room as silently as she had entered. The next morning I examined the bottles. Everything looked normal, untouched. But I knew better. I took the medications to a pharmacy I had never used before, paid cash, and asked them to analyze the contents. The pharmacist called me 2 days later, his voice grave. "Mrs. Thornton, whoever filled these prescriptions made serious errors. The dosages are wrong. Some of these combinations could cause severe complications, especially with your heart condition." Heart condition. I did not have a heart condition. But Rebecca did not know that. She had assumed, based on Robert's history, that I shared his cardiac weakness. She had been slowly poisoning me, hoping for a natural death that would raise no suspicions. Have you ever discovered that someone's kindness was actually cruelty in disguise? Share your story below. Sometimes putting words to betrayal helps us heal. When that plan apparently was not working fast enough, she escalated. I found the research on her laptop one afternoon when I stopped by their townhouse unannounced. Rebecca was out, and Daniel had left the computer open. I know I should not have looked, but instinct drove me forward. The browser history was a nightmare. How to stage an accident, train platform safety statistics, elderly fall mortality rates, life insurance policies, and suspicious deaths. She was planning to kill me and make it look like an accident. My first instinct was to run to the police, But with what evidence? Browser history could be explained away. The medication tampering was my word against hers, and the pharmacy had no record of who had altered the prescriptions. The recordings were damning but circumstantial. I needed something concrete, something undeniable. So I began to plan my own trap. I started mentioning my Tuesday morning routine, the 9:45 train into the city for my weekly volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. I made sure Rebecca heard about it multiple times. I even asked, innocently, if she might like to join me sometime. "The platform is always so empty that time of morning," I said, watching her eyes light up with possibility. "It is quite peaceful, actually." I knew she would see the opportunity. An empty platform, a rushing train, an elderly woman who might easily lose her balance. The perfect accident. What she did not know was that I had already contacted a lawyer and prepared a sealed letter detailing everything. The recordings, the medication tampering, my suspicions, and my prediction about what she might attempt. The letter was to be opened only in the event of my sudden or suspicious death. I also contacted an old friend from Robert's Police Academy days, a retired detective named Marcus Hayes. I told him everything, showed him everything. He agreed to help. "We will catch her in the act," he said grimly. "But you need to be willing to let this play out, to put yourself at risk." I looked at this man who had been at Robert's funeral, who had known our family for 30 years, and I nodded. "She has already put me at risk," I said. "Now it is time to put her at justice." They thought I was a helpless old woman, weak and vulnerable. They had no idea what I was capable of when protecting my life and my husband's legacy. Rebecca took the bait with disturbing eagerness. "Mom," she said one Sunday dinner, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I have been thinking, you should not be taking that train alone at your age. What if something happened? What if you fell?" The irony of her words made my stomach turn. "I would love to accompany you on Tuesday," she continued. "Keep you company. Make sure you are safe." Daniel looked surprised. "Really? But you have that meeting with your accountant Tuesday morning." Rebecca's smile never wavered. "I rescheduled. Family is more important." Family. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I smiled back, playing my part perfectly. "That would be lovely, dear. Thank you for thinking of me." Marcus and I had spent the previous week setting up our counter operation. Plainclothes officers would be stationed on the platform, positioned to look like ordinary commuters. Cameras, real ones, not the fake security camera Rebecca had checked, would be hidden in strategic locations, capturing every angle of the platform. And I would wear a wire. "Are you sure about this, Eleanor?" Marcus asked me the night before. "Once you step onto that platform, you are trusting us to react fast enough. If something goes wrong..." "If something goes wrong, then she wins," I said firmly. And I refused to let her win. Robert spent his entire life building that legacy for our family, for our son. I will not let that woman destroy everything he worked for. Tuesday morning arrived with brutal cold. I dressed carefully, layers of clothing concealing the small recording device taped to my chest. My hands shook as I buttoned my coat, not from fear, but from rage. How dare she? How dare she plot my death so casually, so callously? Rebecca arrived at my door at 9:15, right on schedule. She wore designer boots, expensive, I noted, for someone supposedly drowning in debt, and a concerned expression that might have fooled someone who did not know better. "Ready, Mom?" she asked. "Ready," I replied. The walk to the train station took 12 minutes. Rebecca made small talk about the weather, about Daniel's work, about meaningless things while I responded with similar banalities. Anyone watching would have seen a caring daughter-in-law escorting her elderly mother-in-law to catch a train. Only I knew I was walking with my would-be murderer. We reached Platform 7 at 9:38. Exactly as I had described, It was nearly empty. An elderly man reading a newspaper at the far end, one of Marcus's officers. A young woman in scrubs, apparently heading to a hospital shift, another officer. A businessman checking his phone, Marcus himself. Rebecca guided me toward the middle of the platform, away from the few other passengers. My heart began to race. This was it. "Quite cold this morning," she said, her voice tight. "Yes," I agreed, standing exactly where I needed to stand, where the hidden cameras would capture everything. In the distance, I heard the rumble of the approaching train. Rebecca heard it too. Her hand moved to my shoulder, the gesture appearing supportive to anyone watching casually. But I felt the tension in her fingers, the positioning of her palm against my shoulder blade. "Mom," she said softly, "I want you to know that Daniel and I really appreciate everything you have done for us." My blood turned to ice. This was it, the moment before she would push. "I want you to know," she continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, "that this is nothing personal." The train's headlight appeared in the tunnel. The rumble grew to a roar. Rebecca's hand pressed harder against my back, positioning me at the platform's edge. And then she leaned close, so close I could feel her breath on my ear, and whispered those 7 words that would seal her fate. "Everyone will believe it was an accident." Time became elastic in that moment. The approaching train seemed to move in slow motion, its roar fading to a distant hum as every sense in my body sharpened to crystalline focus. Rebecca's hand pressed against my back, her fingers spreading to maximize the force of her push. I felt her weight shift, her muscles tensing for the lethal shove that would send me tumbling onto the tracks. But I had been ready for this moment. Years ago, Robert had insisted I take self-defense classes after a string of muggings in our neighborhood. I had protested. What use was self-defense for a woman in her 60s? But he had insisted, and I had learned. I learned about balance, about leverage, about using an attacker's own momentum against them. As Rebecca pushed, I dropped my center of gravity and pivoted sharply to my left, a movement I had practiced 1,000 times in that self-defense class years ago. Her hand slipped past me, her forward momentum suddenly meeting no resistance. She stumbled forward, her expensive boots skidding on the platform's cold concrete, her arms pinwheeling as she fought for balance. For one terrible second, I thought she might actually fall onto the tracks. Despite everything, despite the poison and the plots and the cold-blooded murder attempt, I felt my hand reach out instinctively to grab her coat. I caught her, just as Marcus and the other officers descended. "Police! Do not move!" Rebecca's face cycled through confusion, shock, and then pure rage as she realized what had happened. She had been set up, caught, exposed. "You!" she snarled at me, all pretense of kindness evaporating like morning mist. "You knew." "I knew," I confirmed, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I have known for quite some time." The officers pulled her away from the platform's edge, handcuffs clicking around her wrists. Other commuters, real ones this time, stopped to stare, pulling out phones to record the dramatic scene. "You cannot prove anything," Rebecca spat, still fighting. "It is your word against mine. I was trying to keep her from falling." Marcus stepped forward, holding up a small recording device. "Actually, Mrs. Thornton has been wearing a wire. We have everything on tape, including your confession that this was planned to look like an accident." The color drained from Rebecca's face. "Additionally," Marcus continued, his voice hard and professional, "we have the pharmacy records showing tampering with Mrs. Thornton's medications. We have your internet search history. We have recordings from Mrs. Thornton's home of you discussing her death. And now we have attempted murder, captured on 4 different cameras from multiple angles." Rebecca's legs seemed to give out. The officers held her upright as she processed the scope of her failure. Daniel, she whispered, and for the first time, I heard something genuine in her voice. Fear. Where is Daniel? Your husband was brought in for questioning an hour ago, Marcus said. He is cooperating fully. Apparently, he has been keeping his own records of your increasingly erratic behavior. He is not as complicit as you thought. That was not entirely true. Daniel had known more than he should have, had suspected more than he acted on. But in the end, faced with the reality of his wife's murderous intentions, he had chosen his mother over his marriage. It was a small comfort in the wreckage of our family. Has someone you loved ever disappointed you so deeply that it changed who you are? Tell me in the comments how you found your way back to trusting people. As the officers led Rebecca away, she turned back to me one last time. The hatred in her eyes was so pure, so undiluted, that it almost made me step back. I should have poisoned your tea when I had the chance, she hissed. Even in defeat, she remained venomous, but her words were confession, captured on multiple recording devices, sealing her fate even more completely. I watched them put her in the police car, and I felt empty, not victorious, not relieved, just hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only a shell. Marcus approached me gently. Eleanor, are you all right? No, I said honestly, but I am alive, and that is more than she planned for me. The aftermath unfolded rapidly over the following days. Rebecca was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with medications. The prosecutor also added financial fraud charges when they uncovered the extent of her debts and the schemes she had been running to cover them. Her lawyer attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but I refused. I wanted a trial. I wanted everything exposed in open court. I wanted the world to see what greed and desperation could drive a person to do. But more than that, I wanted to send a message. Underestimating an older woman is a fatal mistake. The media had a field day with the story. Daughter-in-law attempts to murder mother-in-law for inheritance. Elderly woman outsmarts would-be killer. The headlines were sensational, and ordinarily I would have hated the attention. But this time, I welcomed it. Let every gold digger, every scheming relative, every person who looked at an elderly family member and saw dollar signs instead of a human being. Let them all see what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. Daniel visited me 3 days after Rebecca's arrest. He looked like he had aged 10 years, his face gray and haggard, his eyes red from crying. Mom, he said, standing in my doorway like a stranger. Can I come in? I stepped aside silently, letting him enter. We sat in the living room, the same room where Rebecca had discussed my death so casually. And for a long moment, neither of us spoke. I did not know, he finally said. Not about the platform, not about the plan to push you. I swear to you, Mom, I did not know she would go that far. But you knew something, I said quietly. You heard her talk about my death. You heard her wish I would die sooner, and you said nothing. He flinched as if I had struck him. I thought it was just talk, venting. I do not know what I thought. You thought it was easier to look away than to confront your wife, I said. You chose comfort over conscience. I am sorry, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. I am so sorry. I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I had raised, the man I barely recognized, and I felt a complicated tangle of love, anger, disappointment, and grief. I forgive you, I said finally, but forgiveness does not mean things go back to how they were. You have a long road ahead if you want to rebuild my trust. He nodded, understanding that this was both grace and consequence. What happens now? He asked. Now? I stood up, suddenly tired beyond measure. Now I live my life. I volunteer at the children's hospital. I manage your father's estate responsibly. I do all the things Rebecca wanted to stop me from doing, and I do them knowing that I refuse to be a victim. And us? You and me? That depends on you, Daniel, on whether you are willing to do the hard work of becoming someone I can trust again. He left shortly after, and I sat alone in my house, the house Rebecca had coveted, the house that had nearly become my tomb, and I allowed myself to cry. Not for Rebecca, not even for the danger I had faced, but for the family I had lost, for the daughter-in-law I had welcomed with open arms, for the son who had failed me when I needed him most. But I had survived, and survival, I was learning, was its own form of victory. The next morning would bring new challenges, new conversations, new steps forward. But that night I simply sat in Robert's favorite chair, wrapped in one of his old sweaters that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and I whispered to him in the darkness, "I protected what you built, my love. I protected us." And I swear I felt him whisper back, "I never doubted you would." The trial began on a grey Monday morning in March, exactly 3 months after the platform incident. I had spent those months in a strange kind of limbo, simultaneously healing and preparing for the ordeal of seeing Rebecca again, of reliving the moment she tried to murder me in front of a courtroom full of strangers. The courthouse was packed. The case had captured public attention, and the gallery filled with journalists, curious onlookers, and even some victims' rights advocates who saw my story as emblematic of elder abuse and financial exploitation. I sat in the front row of the victims section, dressed simply but elegantly in a navy suit Robert had always loved. I wanted to project strength, dignity, competence, everything Rebecca had dismissed when she saw me as an easy target. Rebecca was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back severely, her face bare of makeup. She looked diminished, smaller somehow, as if exposure had physically shrunk her. When her eyes found mine across the courtroom, I did not look away. I held her gaze until she was the one who turned aside. The prosecution presented their case with methodical precision. The recordings from my home, Rebecca's voice cold and calculating as she discussed my death. The pharmacy expert, explaining how the medication tampering could have caused a fatal heart attack. The internet forensics specialist, walking the jury through Rebecca's disturbing search history. The footage from the platform played on large screens positioned so everyone could see. Even knowing what was coming, even having lived through it, I felt my breath catch as I watched Rebecca position herself behind me, saw her hand press against my back, heard her whispered confession. Everyone will believe it was an accident. Several jurors visibly recoiled. One woman put her hand over her mouth. The judge's expression remained neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten. Rebecca's defense attorney tried valiantly to create reasonable doubt. He suggested the recordings were taken out of context. He argued that the internet searches could have been for a novel she was writing, a claim so absurd that several jurors actually laughed. He claimed the platform incident was a misunderstanding, that Rebecca had been trying to steady me, not push me. But the evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had been thorough, and I had been meticulous in documenting everything. When I took the stand, the defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive old woman, imagining threats, fabricating evidence to frame an innocent daughter-in-law who simply wanted to help manage a complex estate. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, his tone suggesting sympathy I did not want, "is it possible that grief over your husband's death has clouded your judgment? That you misinterpreted legitimate concern as malicious intent?" I looked at him steadily. "Counselor, I am 68 years old. I have a master's degree in accounting. I managed my husband's business affairs for 40 years. I am neither senile nor prone to flights of fancy. Your client tried to kill me because she wanted my money. There's nothing complicated about that. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when others tried to diminish you?" Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. The prosecutor asked me to walk through the timeline of my discovery. I explained finding the recordings, the tampered medication, the research on Rebecca's computer. I described the cold calculation required to set my trap, to walk onto that platform knowing she planned to kill me. "Were you afraid?" the prosecutor asked. "Terrified," I admitted. But I was more afraid of letting her get away with it, more afraid of becoming another statistic, another elderly person whose death was dismissed as natural or accidental when it was actually murder. When I finished testifying, I saw several jurors nodding. I had reached them, made them see me not as a victim but as a survivor who refused to die quietly. Daniel testified for the prosecution. It clearly cost him everything to sit in that witness box and recount the things he had heard, the conversations he had failed to act on, the ways Rebecca's behavior had deteriorated over the months before the platform incident. "Did you ever hear your wife directly state that she wanted your mother dead?" the prosecutor asked. Daniel's voice cracked. "Yes, multiple times. She said my mother was selfish for not dying sooner. She said wealthy old people should know when to step aside. She said she wished my mother would have a heart attack and die, like my father did." Rebecca's attorney objected, claiming hearsay, but the judge allowed it as testimony to Rebecca's state of mind. The most damning testimony came from Rebecca's financial advisor, who revealed the true extent of her debts. $230,000 in personal loans, maxed out credit cards, a failed business venture that had hemorrhaged money for 3 years. She was weeks away from bankruptcy when Robert died, and she had seen my inheritance as her salvation. She told me explicitly, the advisor testified, that she expected to access those funds within the year. She said her mother-in-law was old and not in good health. I assumed she meant through natural causes. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Rebecca's face crumpled. She turned to look at me, and this time there was no hatred in her eyes, just devastation, shock, and the terrible realization of consequences. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. In the interim, I tried to return to normal life. I returned to my volunteer work at the Children's Hospital, finding solace in reading stories to young patients who faced challenges far greater than mine. I tended Robert's garden, preparing it for spring. I had dinner with old friends who surrounded me with love and support, and I prepared my victim impact statement. Sentencing day arrived, but the courtroom was again packed, everyone wanting to see the conclusion of the sensational trial. Rebecca was led in, looking even more diminished than before, as if the verdict had physically broken something inside her. The judge asked if I wanted to make a statement before sentencing. I stood, my hands steady on the paper I had spent days writing and rewriting. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and strong. "Rebecca Sterling married into my family 7 years ago. I welcomed her with open arms. I treated her as a daughter. I trusted her with my love, my home, and my son's happiness." I paused, looking directly at Rebecca. She repaid that trust by attempting to murder me for money, not in a moment of passion or rage, but through calculated, premeditated planning. She tampered with my medication, hoping to cause a heart attack. When that did not work fast enough, she planned to push me in front of a train. The only thing that saved my life was my own vigilance and the help of law enforcement. I should not have had to trap my own daughter-in-law to prove she wanted me dead. I should not have had to risk my life on a train platform to bring her to justice. Your Honor, Rebecca did not just try to take my life. She tried to steal my husband's legacy, manipulate my son, and profit from a grief and vulnerability she helped create. She looked at an elderly woman and saw only an obstacle to money she felt entitled to. I asked the court to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law, not just for me, but for every elderly person who has ever been targeted by family members who see inheritance as more important than life. For every trusting parent who welcomed someone into their family only to be betrayed. For everyone who has ever been underestimated because of their age. I folded my paper and looked at the judge. She tried to kill me because she thought I was weak. I am here today to prove she was wrong. The courtroom was silent. Even Rebecca's attorney had no response. The judge took a long moment before speaking. Mrs. Sterling, you have been convicted of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple related charges. The evidence against you was overwhelming. Your actions were premeditated, calculated, and showed a stunning disregard for human life. This court finds that you are a danger to society, and specifically to Mrs. Thornton. You have shown no remorse and no understanding of the gravity of your crimes. He paused, looking down at his papers. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution for all legal fees and medical expenses incurred by Mrs. Thornton. Rebecca collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder, but even he looked relieved it was over. As they led her away, she turned back one final time. Our eyes met, and in that moment I saw not the monster who had tried to kill me, but a broken woman who had destroyed her entire life through greed. I felt no satisfaction in her tears, no joy in her devastation, only a deep, weary sense that justice, while necessary, could never undo the damage she had caused. 6 months have passed since Rebecca's sentencing. 6 months of rebuilding, healing, and learning to trust again, not just others, but myself. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, as if Rebecca's malevolent presence had cast a shadow I only noticed after it was gone. I walked through rooms without the constant vigilance, without checking over my shoulder, without wondering if today might be the day someone tries again. Daniel and I are slowly, carefully rebuilding our relationship. He moved out of the townhouse next door. Too many memories, too much pain embedded in those walls, and found an apartment across town. We have dinner every Thursday evening, and in those meals, we are learning to be mother and son again. He is in therapy now, working through the guilt and the grief and the complicated knot of emotions that comes from loving someone who turned out to be a monster. I see him trying, genuinely trying, to understand how he failed to protect me, how he allowed fear of confrontation to override his moral obligations. I kept telling myself it was not that serious, he confessed over dinner last week, that she was just stressed, just talking. I convinced myself that I was protecting our marriage when really I was abandoning you. You were caught in an impossible situation, I told him, though I did not absolve him. But you chose to face it eventually. That matters. We are not what we were. We may never be, but we are building something new, founded on honesty rather than assumption, on proven trust rather than blood obligation. I have also discovered an unexpected community. After the trial, I was contacted by dozens of elderly people and their advocates who had experienced similar situations. Adult children or their spouses viewing them as obstacles to inheritance, financial exploitation, medical neglect, outright abuse. I began speaking at senior centers and community groups, sharing my story not as a victim, but as someone who fought back, who refused to accept that age meant vulnerability, who proved that vigilance and courage could defeat even the most calculated predators. You saved my life, one woman told me after a presentation. I thought I was imagining things when my son-in-law kept asking about my will, kept suggesting I should update my medications. But hearing your story made me trust my instincts. I hired a lawyer and discovered he had been forging my signature on financial documents. These stories break my heart and fuel my purpose in equal measure. For every Rebecca caught and prosecuted, how many more are out there, successfully killing or exploiting their elderly relatives? How many deaths ruled natural were actually carefully planned murders. I have also reclaimed Robert's legacy in a way that honors his memory while protecting against future exploitation. I established the Robert Thornton Foundation for Elder Protection, funded by a significant portion of the estate Rebecca had tried to steal. The foundation provides legal assistance to elderly people facing financial exploitation, offers education about protecting assets and recognizing warning signs, and advocates for stronger laws around elder abuse. Rebecca wanted that money to fuel her lavish lifestyle. Instead, it is saving lives. What legacy do you want to leave behind? How do you want to be remembered? Tell me in the comments. It is never too early to think about the impact you want to make. I still take the train into the city every Tuesday morning. The same train, from the same platform where Rebecca tried to end my life. Some people have asked me why. Why not choose a different route, a different time, anything to avoid the trauma triggers? But I refuse to let fear dictate my choices. That platform does not belong to Rebecca's attempted murder. It belongs to my survival. Every Tuesday morning, I stand on platform 7, and I remember that I'm stronger than I knew, braver than I believed, and that underestimating me was the last mistake Rebecca ever made as a free woman. Sometimes I see Marcus there. He has retired from the force now, but he still checks in on me, still makes sure I am safe. We have coffee sometimes, and he tells me stories about Robert from their academy days, stories I never heard before. These gifts of memory are precious beyond measure. Robert would be so proud of you, Marcus told me last month. He always said you were the strongest person he knew. Watching you handle all of this proved him right. I think about that often, about whether Robert would be proud or devastated that I was put in this position, or angry that his son failed to protect me. Probably all three, simultaneously, because love is complicated and grief even more so. But I choose to believe Marcus is right, that Robert, wherever he is, saw me stand on that platform and refuse to be a victim, that he saw me trap my would-be killer and bring her to justice, that he knows his legacy is not just money and property, but the strength he helped build in me through 43 years of partnership. I have also learned to forgive myself for the things I did not see earlier, for trusting Rebecca when I should have been cautious, for ignoring small warning signs because I wanted to believe the best in her, for waiting so long to act once I knew the truth. A therapist I have been seeing, yes, even we survivors need help processing trauma, helped me understand that trusting people is not a weakness, that Rebecca's betrayal says everything about her character and nothing about my judgment. You responded appropriately when you discovered the truth, my therapist said. You did not ignore it or rationalize it away. You acted strategically and courageously. That is all anyone can ask of themselves. I am learning to accept that, learning to walk through the world with cautious optimism rather than paranoid vigilance, learning that Rebecca was an aberration, not a template for understanding humanity. Most days I succeed. Some days I still check my medications twice before taking them. Some days I still jump when someone approaches me from behind. Trauma leaves marks that time softens but never fully erases. But I am here. I am alive. I'm making a difference in the world. And Rebecca is in prison, where she will remain for the next 14.5 years minimum. That is not revenge. That is justice. Last week, I received a letter from Rebecca. The prison authorities forwarded it with a note asking if I wanted to receive correspondence from her. I almost said no, almost threw it away, unopened. But curiosity won out. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten in the neat script I remembered from birthday cards she used to give me. In it, she apologized. She claimed she had been driven mad by debt and desperation, that she never truly wanted to hurt me, that she was haunted every day by what she had tried to do. I see your face in my dreams, she wrote. I see you on that platform and I wake up screaming. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I needed you to know that I am sorry, that I wish I could undo everything, that I would give anything to go back and be the daughter-in-law you deserved instead of the monster I became. I read the letter 3 times, analyzed every word, every phrase, looking for manipulation or insincerity. The truth is, I will never know if her remorse is genuine. People are capable of extraordinary self-deception. Rebecca may truly believe she is sorry while simultaneously believing she was justified. The human mind is endlessly talented at holding contradictory truths. I decided not to respond, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. Rebecca had already taken enough of my energy, my peace, my sense of safety. I would not give her any more, not even in the form of acknowledgement. I burned the letter in my fireplace, watching the pages curl and blacken, the words disappearing into ash. It felt ceremonial, like a final goodbye to the nightmare that had consumed so much of my life. Daniel asked me recently if I am happy. It was such a simple question, but I found myself struggling to answer. Am I happy that my daughter-in-law tried to murder me? Of course not. Am I happy that my family was torn apart by greed? Never. But am I happy that I survived? That I fought back? That I refused to be a silent victim? Yes. Absolutely yes. I am content, I finally told him. I am at peace. I am purposeful. And I am learning that happiness is not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning despite it. He smiled at that, a real smile, the kind I had not seen from him in over a year. That sounds like something Dad would say. Your father was a wise man, I agreed, and he taught me that strength is not about never falling down. It is about getting back up every single time, no matter how hard the fall. That is what I have done. That is what I continue to do. I got back up after grief. I got back up after betrayal. I got back up after attempted murder. And I will keep getting back up for as long as I have breath in my body and fire in my heart. Because Rebecca Sterling tried to push me in front of a train, but she failed to understand one crucial truth. I am not easy to kill. I am not easy to break. And I'm absolutely not easy to silence. I am Eleanor Thornton. I am 69 years old. I am a widow, a mother, an advocate, a survivor. And I'm still here. Still standing, still fighting for a world where people like Rebecca face consequences and people like me receive justice. That is my legacy. That is my triumph. That is my revenge. Not delivered through malice, but through living fully, purposefully, and unapologetically despite every attempt to stop me. If you have stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness to my survival. I want to leave you with this. If something in your life feels wrong, trust that instinct. If someone in your family makes you uncomfortable, even if you cannot articulate why, do not dismiss those feelings. If you are elderly or vulnerable and someone is pressuring you about your finances, your will, your estate, get help immediately. Document everything. Trust carefully. Protect yourself fiercely. Age does not make you weak. It makes you experienced. It gives you decades of accumulated wisdom, intuition, and strength. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you are younger and reading this, remember, the elderly people in your life are not obstacles to overcome or resources to exploit. They are human beings with value that extends far beyond their bank accounts. They deserve respect, dignity, and protection. Rebecca saw me as nothing more than an impediment between her and money. She paid for that perspective with her freedom. Let that be a lesson to anyone who believes vulnerability is the same as weakness, or that age is the same as helplessness. We are stronger than you think. We are braver than you believe. And we will fight back when cornered, every single time. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or recognize something in your own life, please subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me what you learned or how this touched you. Your engagement keeps this community strong, and your stories remind me why sharing mine matters. Tell me, what is the most important lesson you are taking away from Eleanor's story? How will you protect yourself or your loved ones? What will you do differently after hearing what happened to me? Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together, we create a community where survivors are celebrated, predators are exposed, and justice, slow and sometimes painful as it is, ultimately prevails. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of my survival. And remember, you are never too old to fight back, never too vulnerable to demand justice, never too weak to win. Stay vigilant, stay strong, stay safe. This is Eleanor Thornton, signing off, but not disappearing, never disappearing.